Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks YouTube channel slash podcast, where I, your host, film culture critic and journalist Carolyn Hayes, speak to film creators around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm very happy to be joined by filmmaker Luke Angus to talk about his animated short film, Solstice, which is an award-winning short film. It won last year at the Short San Asia Film Festival, which coincidentally I was this close to attending in person, so I might have met you there. But it's a beautiful film about solitude, love, devotion. I think grief and how grief can be all consuming and as destructive as it is a process that we need to get through. But we'll get into that. And it's just this film about this Inuit man, Tulak in the Arctic Circle, who is just living this life day by day, minute by minute, second by second, waiting to have the solstice appear. And the solstice is the longest day and the shortest day of the year. And it's a heartbreaking film. I got emotional at the end. I got teary-eyed.
Yep.
I legit cried. I'm not even joking. But before we get into that, first of all, Luke, thank you so much for joining me. Yay!
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's
Thank
great to be
you.
here.
Thank you. And you're my first official interview for 2026.
Oh,
So
what a privilege. Thank you.
yes. And of course it had to be one about grief. I had to be one about grief. Of course.
Yeah, I know.
Typical me.
January blues. We start off all happy.
Right? But first of all, thank you again, Luke. But first, talk to me about how you got into filmmaking and what inspired you to become an animator.
Filmmaking's a funny one. I can't think of a time. I mean, growing up, I probably did about as much as most people did. Maybe it's right if you had the sort of the sort of home camera or something, and you would make little films. I have lots of siblings, and so we'd make little home films and home movies. But I don't think of that as the time I really got into film. To me, it was more. I'd always had a lot of creative writing, a lot of ideas for stories. And then when I went to university and to study animation, that was when I really realized what 3D animation software packages could do now. And I remember getting really excited about, I think when I'd grown up with animation, it was things like Lego stop motion, and I would used to make PowerPoint presentations where every slide was slightly different, and I'd tap really fast, and it would look like a little animation of something. Um, but it was obviously so limiting in what you could do with that. And then so that was probably all I did animation wise growing up. And then it was only when I went to university to study 3D animation that I maybe did realize how far that had all come and how accessible it was. I'd obviously seen it in movies like Toy Story and things, but didn't really realize that that was accessible to the average person could just download software like that and make their own. And suddenly I just realized I have this software that I can make all these ideas I have in my head. Like I have all these stories I've written down, like hundreds, and now I have this tool that I can make them with. And I think backwards from that realization, I sort of got into the sort of theory of filmmaking and how to tell a story and how to pace out your shots and edit and everything else that stems either side of animation. So I think that was probably it. I do remember that point, just being really excited about the potential of what I could do if by myself. I could just sit and essentially I have a film studio on my computer and I can now make any film I want.
Hmm. Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 35, and yes, you can ask.
Okay, so the reason I asked is because you mentioned PowerPoint. And the reason I mentioned that is
Mm.
because PowerPoint was the way that many of us of a certain generation, that's the millennials,
Yeah, it's funny because
we
I don't know. Like, is that true that a lot of people, other people, animated with a PowerPoint?
when I was in school, I'm 42, but I'm
Mm.
42.
Am
I'm
I? Yeah.
42, but I had to remind myself. But when I was in secondary school and in like my early 20s and
Hmm.
like into my 20s, like PowerPoint was how a lot of us did like those kind of like presentations, like as
Hmm.
I'm from the Caribbean, so we didn't like getting packages like what's that that one where you do like Photoshop and those kind of
Oh yeah, yeah,
programs,
yeah, yeah.
like they were very expensive. But I
Hmm.
remember like when personal computers were really picking up, like we got like these CD packages, and the CD
Hmm.
packages would
Hmm.
come with like very basic animation programs sometimes on the CDs, right? And in PowerPoint, when this is when Windows was really
Yeah.
at its peak, you could do like basic animation user PowerPoint graphs and the animation programs
Because
and
even
stuff,
even the animation that was included in PowerPoint, like the animation that was like, you could make your text jump into frame and animate
right?
into that. I wasn't doing that. I was like going on slide one and I would draw a little stick man and then I'd
Mhm.
go to slide two and I'd move that stick man slightly by myself. I'd rotate the arm
Yeah.
slightly and I'd animate that and then I would just literally click right to go through the slides really, really fast
Mhm.
and you would play the animation or something. So I don't know if that was a thing, if lots of people did that and it was like, it was never meant for animation. It was a slideshow software, but I used to, yeah, make loads
It
of little films
wasn't
with it.
it wasn't made for it, but I think our generation was so innovative in the
Yeah,
way we use technology. That
right.
is something that generations before us, and like I would say, Gen Y, was it Gen Z, that they don't have
Yeah.
because we literally had to learn to adapt from analog to digital,
But it's funny
like
because we didn't
that.
have social media to like tell each other about this stuff. It's funny that we were all doing it, but we weren't really, there's no communication to tell, like share like this new thing in PowerPoint you can animate with it. And it's interesting to
Right.
hear that other people were doing that with PowerPoint, almost not using it properly, but finding a creative way to animate. Or yeah, that's funny.
We didn't. There was like things like MySpace, but again, like MySpace, like in the Caribbean, MySpace was hard to access because of
Hmm.
what we would call geo blocking now. So
Hmm.
like I knew
Yeah,
of
yeah.
MySpace, but I didn't have at MySpace because there was a package you had to get to
Mm.
use MySpace, and like we had dial up. So like dial up and MySpace
Yeah,
was not
yeah. Same.
compatible, but we did like we a lot of us like I think in that generation like we used programs for things that they weren't originally
Yeah.
intended,
Yeah.
like what you're talking about, like with the doing like individual slides. That's basically flip. I can't remember like when you
Yeah,
do like
exactly. It's like a
animations,
flip
flip
book. You're
books, right?
treating PowerPoint like it's a flip book and yeah.
Right. So like we had to learn to adapt. So that's why there's so many. When you look at some of the best animated films
Mm.
and TV shows and even like video games, like they're
Hmm.
made by people from our generation or just older
Yeah.
who had the analog and went straight into and had to learn to adapt.
That's why when you discover something like 3D software that's made for this purpose and it's incredibly powerful, it's amazing to be like, oh, I was clicking through PowerPoint slides not long ago, and now I'm in this package that can make Toy Story. It's like the differences. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah, because with PowerPoints, we literally have to build everything from the from like
Yeah,
you have the
yeah,
blank slate
exactly.
and you got to build all of these informations. And
Yeah.
like there was this discussion on Twitter recently where people were saying like in for our generation, like the millennials and like early Gen Z,
Hmm.
like in school we had to write essays on the spot in class.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
teacher said you read this book, whatever, do an essay right here, right now, and
Right.
you have to do it by pencil.
And it was with like a pen, yeah, pen, paper, or pencil. Like, yeah,
Right,
it's the
and
worst.
you couldn't really edit it out, right? So you have to
Mm.
think
We
critically
used to
on
have
the
two, we
fly.
used to have, for my creative writing classes in school, we used to have two, we called them jotters, but like, I guess books. One of them was for like you could just like quickly write a story with a pencil, write your story, right? And then the ones that the teacher liked or that got a good grade, you had your other one, which was you had to rewrite it in really nice, like take your time. And it's so funny to think you had these two that were like the messy, creative one, and you were just scribbling things down. And then, but I remember having to rewrite essays all the time just because it was, yeah, you were trying to do it neatly. If you made one mistake in your nice one, you had to like, yeah. I wish I could find those
Yeah,
somewhere. I would love to read my old stories.
yeah, and so like so that was why I asked you about it because I think having that experience, like I for me that's one of the things in watching Solstice that kind of really stuck out is there's this kind of old school sensibility and how the film looks, and you know
Hmm.
what I mean, like you like when you think of like old like original Pixar animation, like
Hmm.
there's, I'm terrible with names so forgive me, but there's the film with the robot that's like stranded in space.
Wally.
Wally,
Hmm.
I've never actually watched that, but
Oh, Wally's
I
great.
get this. I'm terrible. But like, but like Wally, but then also like my favorite Pixar film is The Incredibles. There's like
Yeah.
this old school sensibility in that, but then also like, and I think honestly, those kind of like feels and textures and like the storytelling
Hmm.
can only really come
Hmm.
from filmmakers who've had a very particular experience growing up. And I had this discussion with another filmmaker, Frank Abney, about his own short film recently, and I was saying like when you're from a particular generation, there's things that other generations can't really tap into because you have your everything, your environment, and but in particular what's going on
Hmm.
technologically inform
Hmm.
the way your work looks. So that I want to ask you about that, about when you discovered, oh, there's the programs I can use to make 3D art. What is it about 3D art in particular that really captures you, because there's different forms of animation. You know, there's 2D animation, there's
Yeah.
even like 4D,
I
but
think it
like
is just the the limitlessness of it. Like it is unbounded. It's just you can really do whatever you want and you don't need to. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. I think also just what you're saying about Pixar short films, they were the like pinnacle. I grew up with Pixar shorts. Like I would go to the cinema to watch the new Pixar film just to see the short before the film. Like I used to love that they would play the little short before the feature. And th I don't really real I don't think I realized it until later. Now thinking back, I'm like, oh, that was definitely what inspired me the most. Even my storytelling now, where it's like there's no dialogue, it's all visual storytelling. And it's very like emotionally resonant. It's very, it's got these you can I didn't I don't realize I'm doing it, but when I write these things, I obviously look back and be like, oh, it's so clear. I mean, I've got Woody on the shelf behind me. It's so clearly what was inspiring me, and that you don't know that. You just as, kid growing up, you just have all these external environmental sources being input to your brain. And then when you're older, you start making stuff and it all kind of comes out in its own way. But yeah, Pixar short stories, I think, but they were all 3D animation. And so when I started to realize I had access to that, I think I always knew I had access to 2D animation because that's essentially you could just do, hand-drawn flip books. What we're talking, it's all that's 2D animation. But yeah, 3D, I didn't know I had access to that. So it was amazing to find out like, oh, this is accessible. You can get this stuff. And I think that's probably what it was.
Yeah, you mentioned the Pixar shorts, and like those shorts are some of the most amazing
Yeah.
um films made. And one of them is because, like, again, I think there's something, like when you have a film that has no dialogue, especially because it's a short film, like you don't have to really think about what the characters are saying verbally. You're taking everything that you're
Hmm.
intaking from the visual environment and everything these characters are doing, from every facial expression, every gesture,
Hmm.
because that's the language that is being related to us. And you don't have to focus on their voices, like voices are part of communication, but so is body language, so is facial
Yeah.
expression, so it's
There's also just
like
a universality. If you take away the dialogue, you've now got a global audience. Anyone can now understand your film. You doesn't no need to speak English to understand. I also I've said this before about storytelling without dialogue or any exposition or even narration is your brain has to work a little bit harder to like pay attention to like pick up the visual cues as to what the plot is, what is happening, what is the story, what does the character want, why are they sad, why are they happy? You have to work a bit harder because you're not just especially the details of the story where there's not just two characters talking essentially talking to the viewer and with exposition telling them what the story's about. But I think just from a human level, we enjoy watching something where we have to work a little bit harder. It like stimulates our brain a bit more and it's more rewarding. You feel a bit more rewarded when you understand the story and no one has said a word. You feel it's quite like a nice rewarding feeling to have this communication between you and the filmmaker that like you're on the same page, even though nothing has been said, there's this like unspoken language that you're both speaking just through these clever, choices of cameras and choices of what you're showing and what time. And I think we enjoy that just fundamentally, like as a human watching something and consuming it. And so
no,
I think there's a power in it. Yeah.
I agree, because like, I was thinking that one of my favorite Pixar films, which is one of the short ones, but there's a feature short, is the La La Love You, um and the short. It doesn't have dialogue, but the only language we hear is like the singing, right? And
Yeah.
like, they're
Yeah.
singing, that's the song. There's a song that plays at the end, and like I love that that film doesn't rely on the spoken language, but
Hmm.
they rely on the music, because the
There's
music is
music. Yeah.
telling a story, and the music is important because it's telling the story of Hawaii, and like
Yeah.
that's a important part of their culture. And I think for like a film like Solstice, where the characters aren't talking, you're relying heavily on like not only on the body language of the characters, but on like knowledge of like the Inuit culture, and like
Yeah.
and things like understanding winter solstice. What is the winter solstice? What is it about the sky and
Yeah.
the stars?
Yeah.
And when you think of all cultures, all indigenous cultures, like there's one commonality about them, is the stars. Like
Hmm.
humans learn to navigate the world by
Yeah.
navigating the stars, by using the stars to find our way. And so I wanted to use this as a jumping off point to talk about solstice. So I wanted to ask you about that, about like because I watched your short film Alienated, This is the one from about 4 years ago, and I noticed there's a few similarities between
Yeah,
Alienated and
lots of
Solstice.
similarities. There
And
are.
there's these themes of solitude and grief and loss.
Yeah.
But the first thing I want to talk about is actually the theme of the stars, the heavens, like what
Yeah.
back in the time would have been called the heavenly bodies, the
Yeah.
celestial bodies.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because you're using the stars and like the environment as a communicative method in this film itself. And our knowledge of what the stars means to humanity, no matter what culture you're from.
Yeah, it's actually the Alienated and Solstice are part of what's going to be a trilogy. My third film is the same. So I'm making this trilogy, which has themes of isolation, loneliness, and loss, set against the backdrop of the cosmos, against the stars. And in some way, the characters in the films use the cosmos and use the stars in some way to cure or help their loneliness and to get through that. Alienated, as you saw, was sort of using the sort of quirks of physics to travel faster than light, to look back at the light that you just left, and it's almost like tricking yourself into seeing someone that you've lost. Or you can go ahead of the light to look back at yourself, but that looks like someone else. And so if you're lonely, it was this perfect little story that I thought was this great way to sort of use the cosmos in a way to cure your loneliness, if even if it's not a healthy cure, it's just like a temporary fix. Solstice was the same. Solstice was another idea where it's like this is such a perfect like second part in the sort of anthology to be the characters doing the same thing. We have the same isolated setting, although on Earth this time and not on a planet. But for all intents and purposes, the Arctic might as well just be another planet. It's like completely desolate ice sheet with vast nothingness, with this tiny little person among it all, surviving and living them and looking for companionship more, and having lost someone that they were previously with, having had that companionship and now being left in this really harsh environment alone. And they're just such powerful settings to place a character. And it's such an immediate like you have such immediate empathy and such immediate like recognition of the problem. To be like, you're not only alone, but look where you are. You're in the middle of absolute nowhere with nothing. Um and so but for whatever reason, just I don't know, I mean I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I've sci-fi is almost all I consume. All my books I read are sci-fi, and I think even though Solstice is the most sort of earth-based, grounded film I've made, it's got an element of this because it's got the stars as the backdrop. It's so fundamental that it's almost got that sci-fi element in it, and it is magic in the stars, and it's using the stars to fix your problem in a sense. But yeah, so this is the second film in what will be three films that all share these themes. So I'm glad you picked up on that with Alienated, that they are similar, and there's lots of other little things that I'm matching across the films. But yeah, to use the stars as the backdrop and as the like you said, there is something just like fundamental about it and something human about, we've had the stars and navigated by the stars and look to the stars for answers or look to the stars for meaning, and that's definitely reflected in Solstice. It's like all he's got for company is this like incredible canvas above his head of this like endless Arctic stars.
Yeah, because the film, because I had the thought when I was watching Solstice, but then I watched Alienated, and there's this phrase that I've seen, I guess, like hundreds of times in films and in books and like the various media, and again, mostly when it's referring to like indigenous cultures, or where people would say, if you miss me, look to the stars, that's where I'll be. Because people, even if they don't believe in God or like heaven in with regards to in a religious context, we are so fascinated by the heavens, as in the universe, the stars, the planets, that when we think of death, when we think of like the moving on, that there is something beyond death, and that thing that is beyond death is the sky, it's the stars that's going up. And so in seeing that in both Solstice and in Alienated, as you said, is going to be in the third film. Talk to me about just like use it as an inspiration of these characters. They don't have anyone to tell them look to the stars, but they just inherently, that's where they're looking. Even like in Alienated, the character is on a planet, and it could be a meteor in the universe, but he's already existing in, well, you know what? We on Earth are already existing in space. We are a planet. We're a giant meteor hurling through
We're in
space.
space.
but he's closer to the stars than we are,
Sure.
but he still intrinsically looks up
Yeah.
to the stars to see this person that he's lost, his companion, his love, his soulmate. And in Solstice, like Tulak, he looks to the stars, and there's a difference in context because again, he's Inuit, so he has that culture in him. But for Alienated, that character doesn't have that, but that's still where he looks, even though he's already existing amongst the stars. Talk to me about, just about using that as inspiration. Like, when did the idea for that first come to you about having these stories?
I think what fascinated me about the Solstice setting compared to Alienated was that Solstice, like you're saying, can look up to the stars for answers and for almost like companionship. The stars just being in and of themselves the most incredible, like especially in the Arctic Circle, the most incredible canvas of like wonder, looking up to like a proper night sky, not a night sky that you see if you're in a city, but like an actual rural night sky is like it's like breathtaking. It's unbelievable. But in Solstice, having this, he lives in part of the world where in the Arctic Circle for months at a time, you won't see the stars. The stars are gone. So the sun never sets for half of the year. And so he's robbed of this partner, this like um companionship in the stars for half of his time there. Um in half of the year. And I love this playing with this idea to be like, that's such a great place to set a story, to be like someone who wants, for whatever reason, someone who needs the stars and wants to have the stars as company, but they live in part of the world where the in the Arctic Circle where the sun doesn't set and it won't give them that, and they have to wait all this time, waiting this time. He's actually waiting for the equinox for the equal day when the sun finally does set for the first time, and then the solstice being the middle of the darkness. But um, yeah, I just thought that was such a perfect place to set the story, and then also the fact that I know this is a spoiler for the ending, but the fact that he lives in a part of the world that happens to have sort of dome structures that could essentially almost mimic the night sky. If you were to poke holes in an igloo, you can almost recreate the night sky. And I just knew that was going to be such a nice ending to get to that point, to get to this like solution that the character has to recreate the night sky inside his igloo. And yeah, those like ideas all just sort of married up at the same time. And I thought that's my next film. That's what it is.
Yeah, and that was fascinating to me because the thing is like when people are depressed, when they're grieving, like they try
Mhm.
to and when we are scared, when we are afraid, the thing we fear most is darkness. Like
Mhm.
wanting to get out of dark. We can't wait for daylight. We can't wait
Mhm.
for to see the sun start to peek across the
Yeah.
horizon and know that in the sunlight there's a chance. There's a chance to run away from what's scaring you at night. There's a chance, a new day brings new beginnings.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
Tulak, daylight brings his worst nightmare.
Yeah, I
Daylight
love that.
brings
I love doing the opposite. I think most people you expect to see if you lived in an environment where let's just say 6 months of the year was sunshine and 6 months of the year was darkness, you would expect the narrative to be they look forward to the sunshine, the summer. But I like the idea of subverting that. And I think that comes from me also. I grew up in the west coast of Scotland, like very rural Scotland, where we had a real night sky. If you look up at the night sky where I grew up, it's like you can see the Milky Way, you can see just like a massive sea of stars. And I used to love going out and in the winter when I go home from school, it would be dark already, and I could go out and look at the stars. And we have my dad would have a telescope, and we'd look at like he could point out the planets. I remember seeing Saturn for the first time through a telescope, and just being amazed that I could see that, and it was just in my back garden. And so I definitely always had an appreciation for the like night sky, the deep night sky in the middle of winter, or and that's why I really like the sort of celebration of the stars rather than it being the opposite. And you expect, oh, the sun is here finally, all the cold nighttime and the darkness is gone, and instead he loves that. He can't wait for it. His whole year is waiting for that time to come so he can be reunited with the stars and with his partner. Yeah,
yeah, I'm from the Caribbean and I miss the stars. I miss
yeah,
because we're close. I'm from Barbados, so we're closer to the equator, right? So like our night
hmm
sky when we get a
that's
really
good.
good night sky, we
Yeah,
get all the stars and the moon looks like it's just hanging like
yeah.
right there. But this film really made me think about how when people are in grief, depending on their circumstances, the thing that we
hmm
are looking forward to the most could be the thing that other people are afraid of.
hmm
And that's I'll kind of touch into that a little bit later when we talk about the end of the film, because the end of the film was just like, oh my god. But but the thing with Tulak and Yuka, like they have this
Mhm.
amazing loving relationship, and it's a playful relationship. We see them
Mhm.
just like enjoying each other's companies, and this is another theme in Alienated, and
Mhm.
it's talking about the grief of a loved one. And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what is it
Mhm.
about the thought of especially a male spouse losing his female partner?
Mhm.
Losing the person that he's meant to comfort and protect. And like for in
Yeah.
both of these films, like they can't protect this person
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
loved. And the reason they can't protect him is that they just happen to be just barely
Yeah.
out of reach. They can't reach
Yeah.
him and kind of pulled him in. And Alienated, he's in the spacecraft, I guess, like testing it out,
Yeah.
testing flight.
Yeah.
And so she's on the ground and he can't get her when the meteor shower happens. And in Solstice, like again, rocks is another theme. A box of
Yeah,
rocks
it
and a
is.
box of
There
tools
is. Yep.
is another theme where like they use because depending if they have to cross lake, they have to use the rocks to test if
Hmm.
where they can walk, where they can take
Yeah.
their sled across. And she forgets where the rock is and she steps to get the wood pile. And I knew when I saw that thing start to take over, I'm like, gosh darn it, she's gonna die. And I was just like, hiya. But I do like how you actually did it because it wasn't because I thought that it was the sled tipping over that would have been the accident
I
that
know.
caused
I
her
did that
to.
on purpose to trick you into thinking that's the moment, and it's
I
not. But
know, you're
there's a similar with Alienated. He trips on the rock, and then in Solstice, the rock is the thing that it's like both those things are like a turning point of like a yeah.
right. And so I want to ask you about that, about this, and because there's so many different ways that you can explore grief and loss and solitude
Hmm.
and isolation. But what is it about just a romantic relationship, a relationship between people who have
Hmm.
this intense love and devotion for someone else, and then losing that kind of just shatters their perception of
Hmm.
connection to the world that they're living in, like these
Yeah.
two men, like they're in these amazing environments, but they can't even enjoy it anymore because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
person that helped them enjoy it is gone now.
I think it's purely comes from just this sort of powerful a storytelling mechanic where you've got these characters in already very barren, isolated, almost dangerous environments, but they had a partner, and it's just showing the vulnerability of that scenario where if you just take away that partner, what you're left with is it's just nothing. But it's I think as a story mechanic and as a story like a driver for story, it's such an immediate like um connection point to the protagonist where you can immediately empathize with they already if they had lost a partner but they lived in a hustling city, you'd be like, oh, it's okay, they've got like people around them. It's just but you're already it's like emphasize like shining a light on isolation and loneliness, which people feel when they lose a partner. And as a metaphor, this is almost like what they're feeling. It's this absolute, there's nothing around them. They're in this like isolated landscape. They might as well be living not in a city. They might as that is where they're at mentally. And I think it's a very good metaphor for just like loss to be in this feeling very alone and feeling very like yeah there's people around you but you've lost the only person you cared about or the one you care about the most. And so it might feel like you're living in the Arctic with nothing around you. It might feel like you're living just on another planet by yourself with no one, the real person you care about is gone. And so to me, it just like I seem to stumble into it quite naturally because and I think it is just from a story point of view, it's such a natural place to like represent that grief is in these very barren, isolated environments.
Do you remember when you first started like being kind of like drawn to these types of stories?
I think part of it's necessity because I make these by myself. So
Mm-hmm.
these films I make completely alone over years. And so it's a long process and I'm very aware of the limitations I have as a solo filmmaker. And I don't think I realize I'm doing it, but I think when I'm writing, because I know I'm making it, I don't tend to write films with 10 characters and 10 environments and all this. Not intentionally. I think I just naturally my brain almost filtered out stories like that without me even realizing it. And then I end up at these very like stripped back stories that are pure and they're about a very focused attention on a couple of characters rather than diluting it with um lots of supporting cast. So I'm not sure. I don't know if it's partly is me doing it naturally without realizing it because I'm aware of how much work it is that how much work I'm going to be doing. And therefore, but I yeah, I don't know. It'd almost be yeah interesting to try and write something that was try and write something. I'm writing a script for a feature, and that I don't plan on making myself. I just for this for the extra fun of writing, and that has got 30 characters in it plus because I know I'm not going to make it. So it's not about loss and loneliness and isolation. So I think that gives a little clue into some of my short films and why they tend to have these themes is because they are solo efforts. I think that's why. I think I don't realize I'm doing it, but that's what I'm doing when I'm writing.
Mm. How long did Solstice take you to make?
It took four years, but not full time. So I have a full time job as a head of animation at an animation studio. So it's mornings before work, it's after work for an hour or two, it's like weekends if I have some time. That for 4 years. But if I was to calculate like roughly, if I was to work on a full-time sort of 9 to 5 job, I think maybe a year to a year and a half, maybe is how long it took to make. There's a few rewrites and I started again a few times and you know, so it's hard to say really, but yeah, it's a long process. You have to be in it. You have to be patient and in it for the long run.
Especially with the kind of details that you have in the show. I want to talk about the technicalities now because
Mhm.
like in Alienated there's a bit of like there's like you said it's very sci-fi focused film because it
Mhm.
takes place in space, it takes place on like it involves like space travel and like there's like in the spaceship like there is an analog design spaceship like so it
Yeah.
has like a basically like a car like how you would drive like a manual car
Yeah.
which is like
Yeah.
the gear shifts and he's
Yeah.
gearing up until it hits the FTL and I love sci-fi too like that's one of my
Oh,
favorite
cool.
genres and like one of my favorite TV shows ever is The Expanse so when I saw
Oh,
the reference
nice.
to
Love
the
the Expanse.
FTL you have you
Yeah.
seen them.
Yeah. I love the Expanse. Seen it all. Yeah.
Oh good right
Yeah. It's fantastic.
it's a great show but so when I saw the
No
FTL reference I was
proto-molecules in this.
like huh.
No proto-molecule in Alienated though.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Because the last thing he would need is to meet upon the proto molecule. Oh my gosh. But yeah, when I saw the FTL drive reference, I was like, it made me think of
Yeah.
the X-Files. Because I've watched the show, of course, but I've also read the books. I've read
That was
all the
also
books.
Battlestar. I think Battlestar Galactica they use I think it's FTL they use as a term. But yeah, I like that. I think it's a kind of general term used in a lot of sci-fi is FTL, but there's some more famous uses of it, but it's a good catch-all term.
Yes, so I want to ask you about just about the research that you do for your films and
Hmm.
like what kind of research did you have to do for Solstice because Solstice again is like it references Inuit culture like
Hmm.
Tulak and Yuka are Inuit characters and you
Hmm.
wanted to stay truthful to to that culture to the heritage especially with regards we see like like the fishing hooks and like the types of fishing
Hmm.
line and their winter gear and everything we mentioned like the stars and like how that's a part of Inuit culture like they have like folklore and like
Yeah. Yep.
and ceremonies that celebrate the stars and the celestial heavens. So what kind of research did you do to prepare for this
Yeah, it's
throughout the film?
definitely sort of the first step is when I know I'm going to set this film in the Arctic Circle by necessity because I need it to be in the part of the world where half the year is in darkness and half the year is in daylight, which technically that's not actually how the Arctic Circle quite works, but it's many months at a time in darkness and many months in daylight. So I knew it had to be Inuit culture, and so it's just the first thing I'm just looking into. Like, there's being aware of just how many Inuit cultures there are, first of all, around across in and out in and around the Arctic Circle, whether they're fully in the Arctic Circle on the edge of it, or even sort of northern Canada, and it was a case of like balancing what the story needed to tell the story I wanted to tell, and then finding I I was aware that this isn't my culture. This isn't my culture to explore or to really, be the voice of the person who's speaking for Inuit culture. So the film is set where it is for the Arctic Circle and um for the necessity of that day night cycle of the year. And then I was just finding parts of different, it's sort of a different Inuit cultures I would borrow from and take ideas from of like a lot of Inuit cultures don't cook their meat. They don't, they'll eat or they preserve it and they'll eat it raw. Or if they do cook, they'll use like fats from animal fat and they'll light that as a like an oil lamp almost, and they'll cook it with that. And then there are some that cook with wood and fire, like a more if they're on the edge of the Arctic Circle where you've got a tree line still, which he lives on right at the edge where there's still like, access to trees. He
Mhm.
has to travel for them, but they're there. But again, there's all these like, and then testing out the ice. There's some fascinating clips and documentaries of like how they would test the ice, and so, I mean, obviously a lot of time it's heavier weighted objects they could throw in certain areas, and there's a lot of as if they're trekking across the ice, they'll often like jag it with a spear in front of them as they go, and so there's like a leader and people. So these are all different cultures. It's important to know how many different Inuit cultures there are across the world. Um, and so you can't really have an Inuit culture that is one thing. It's many things, and it's kind of choosing which elements of it you're for the necessity of story when I needed him to cross the ice. And I knew there was a danger with the ice, and I wanted to. There was a sort of moment in on the thin ice with his partner, and I knew that was going to be a key story moment. So I needed why are they trekking across the ice? Why do they need to do that? And I thought they needed to be getting some firewood or resources. Um, and then the igloo culture is a really interesting one where it's sort of a misconception that they live in igloos. They don't live in igloos. They'll set up an igloo if they're out on a fishing trip or they're out on a
Yeah.
certain expedition for a day or two or something like that. But what I liked about Solstice's story is that I show them at the start as a couple, them building this igloo, and I liked it as a there's almost like a sweet message there that he doesn't want to leave this igloo because it's the one he made with her. It's like this almost like the home that he made with her that he doesn't want to leave and go to land and live there, and he wants to stay at the igloo that he built with her. So um there are all these little cultural references and cultural borrowing it from different Inuit cultures, but yeah, I mean certainly it was the place you start is looking at all of that.
Yeah, and I'm so fascinated, and I was so fascinated by that, but especially when, as you said, like the igloos, like that's not where most of them live throughout the
Mhm.
year. Like I know in like
Yeah.
some cultures that are like closer to like, especially the northern Canadian Inuit and Métis
Hmm.
cultures, like they actually go into the ground, they dig into the frozen ground,
Yeah. Yep.
because it's actually warmer beneath the ground than it
Yeah.
is on the surface because of
Yeah.
wind. And so like there's all of these different, as you said, like cultures and
Hmm.
traditions amongst each community and everything. So like I was really fascinated by that. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about that is in the technical aspects of it now is in their what they're wearing. You know,
Mm.
it's such a seemingly small detail, but it's the one that
Hmm.
I really caught on to at first. I got onto a lot,
Hmm.
but I one thing about one they're wearing is like what Tulak is wearing is like his 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 fur coat and everything is a slightly different
Hmm.
texture than
Hmm.
Yuka's, and it's a slightly different color. It's like a bit lighter in color, and like
Yep.
the hood is like the fur is much more looser. You know, like
Yep.
it came from a wolf or a fox,
Yeah. Yeah.
and hers is browner, and the fibers and
Hmm.
the texture is a bit more finer, you know, like hers is
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
compact. And I
More
don't want to
rigid. Yeah.
ask you about doing that because I just imagine just animating all of these different
Yeah.
textures just for these two characters alone must have taken so much effort. And like, what was the decision to just go the extra step and say, I'm going to give them two
Yeah.
completely different textures and looks when it would have
A
been
lot of
easy?
it, yeah, you're right. It would be definitely easier to just do the same on both. I think a lot of it is just driven by because there's no dialogue, because there's no, it's all visual storytelling. You want to define your two characters quite clearly. So it's just my attempt to make sure you could always tell one from the other.
Yeah.
So you'd have two locks, like you're saying, this big sort of much more flowing fur on the hood, maybe from a longer furred animal that he may have taken it from. There wasn't really any thought put into what the animal was that their fur is on their hood. It was really for the necessity of story clarity and that you could always sort of tell them apart. Even if they're standing far away, you can see which one is which is important when you're quickly cutting between them and you're back and forth. You don't want the viewer to be confused, like, wait, was that Tulak or was that Yucca? And um, so yeah, and then just technically speaking, the fur was always, I mean, that was another one in the research looking up Inuit cultures that no matter what culture, their clothing is just so incredible. Like, and the sort of cartoonized takeaway that I came away with was this, like, they would always be absolutely covered in, obviously outerwear and warm clothing for warmth, but there would always be a little face
Yeah.
poking out. They're never
It's
going
so
to cover
cute.
the whole face up. So I love that element of all the sort of Inuit culture and clothing, and it was like it became the main sort of charm of the characters was this big, almost silly, oversized fur hood and just a tiny little very emotive face poking out of that little fur hood in a way that I felt like this whole story has to be told on this face. It's almost like a big target and a little face sticking
Mm.
out where all the emotion and all that is red. That's where you see how they're feeling and how they're, and it just became the sort of the design of the film, and it became the sort of yeah, the look of the film was this the fur became like a character in itself. I was like, this is it's the first thing you notice when you see these characters is this big furry hood. Yeah.
I love the design of the furries. Like they're so cute and like buffy, and they're almost like the snowman. Like how the
Yeah, I
snowman
know.
almost have that same shape as the snowman. And
Yeah,
I thought it
that's what
was
I was
so
thinking.
cute.
Mhm.
And the other thing, like you mentioned, is one of the things like one of the first scenes in the film is the sunlight peeking through just a crack, one of the
Yeah.
cracks in the igloo. And and I thought it's such a small scene, but I love this scene because it's the sunlight shining through on Tulak's face, and we see the texture of his skin, we see the texture
Hmm.
of the sunlight on his glasses and the fur and like all of the individual little furs
Hmm.
I animated and everything. But one thing that a detail that I really love as a person who wears glasses that I love in this film is the slight frosting on his glasses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want to ask you about that because I someone others said someone who wears glasses and who lives in Canada when
You
I
know
go
what's funny?
like there's
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
there's that
You have to clear
issue.
them up. You know what's funny is I only recently got glasses. Started wearing glasses last year, I think. It was
Okay.
recent. But when I started making the film, I didn't wear glasses. But what was funny was my wife wears glasses. And when I animated that scene you're talking about, the intro scene, he was sleeping, he was lying there and he had his glasses on and the light
Yeah.
would wake him up. And my wife was like, he wouldn't sleep with glasses on. Take his
Okay.
glasses off. So I took the glasses off, and then I have them come out of the igloo and put them on, and yeah, it was like a moment that I was like, yeah, fair enough, good point. I
Yeah,
don't,
we you would have seen
I
our
know, I
glasses, but your
know, but
glasses are like
obviously he's got this massive big hood on, so it's like maybe it doesn't matter. He's got this tiny little glasses on. But
yeah.
that moment as well in the film, that was really important. I had that moment from one of the earliest moments ideas I had was I wanted the film to start with the light cracking through a hole in the igloo and hitting him in the face and waking him up, which is the eventual thing that happens at the end of the movie, which is what gives him the idea to like fix his problem to recreate that. It's what gives him the idea. And then in a deeper sense, I like this almost being like this is Yucca trying to communicate with him, trying to tell him. It's like she's there from the start to say like, wake up, like you can bring me back. But he doesn't get it at first. He's not thinking like that. Then he has this whole, and then the next year when it happens, he finally gets it, and she comes back. It's when she disappears and the light cracks through the igloo and hits him in the face. That's her saying like, "I'm here." Like, yeah, which I
Yeah,
liked.
because there's all these little details in it, and okay, now you just said something interesting about Yoko communicating with him that I was actually thinking the opposite together. But
Hmm.
another interesting detail that I like about the film is the fish. I want to ask you about just like
Yeah.
animating the fish because the
Hmm.
fish has this sheen. Like again, there's
Hmm.
everything else in the film when you think about it's kind of dull. And not that the
Yeah.
colors are dull, but like the texture that like if you see mirror lights, they look the same. Like the rusty nail, the
Hmm.
wood of the crate and the board that he uses to count the nails
Yeah.
is dull, like the fur is animated, like the wind blows and everything, but it still has it doesn't shine, it doesn't shimmer.
Hmm.
But the
Hmm.
only thing that really shimmers apart from the star and the fire is the fish. And I'm
Yeah.
so curious about just like the technicalities of animating a fish to get that silver glow of the scales
Yeah.
reflecting the sunlight. Because it's like I'm always fascinated about just the animation process, like how do you
Sure.
actually do it? Like just like I talk just about using
Well,
that as
I
a
think a lot of the time as well, it's like there's a lot of misconception into how it's done, or I'll often get a lot of praise for something that I don't feel like I deserve the praise for. The fish was actually one where I sourced. There's asset libraries online for different
mm,
assets you can download and buy or whatever. The fish was one I got online, and so it was it animation wise, the actual technical animation of the fish. That's all me. So, but yeah, I mean but I mean, there's lots of clever maths going on with 3D software to get that like specular highlight on the scales and to get the make it look like there are scales, or the little beady eye that's there, and then getting the weight of the fish as he's moving his
yeah.
spear, and it's like like flopping around as he's. I mean, that's just animation. That's just you go. I guess like you have to feel the weight of it and feel the believability of the fattiness of the fish when you're animating the every step he's taking and the fish is like flopping behind, and
Mm.
so there's lots of ways of doing that as well, and there's no one answer. You could simulate that and make the computer do all the work, but yeah, that's all manually animated. But yes, it's there's a lot of clever. The computer does a lot of clever trickery and a lot of clever of the heavy lifting, and the artist at the end to like fine tune it basically.
Yeah, no, because I saw the fish and I'm like, I'm just so curious about how you get the shimmer and everything. And what you said about Yuka communicating with Tulak with the light. I was actually kind of reading it as her saying, "Wake up, it's a new day." Time to
That's
like
nice. Yeah,
that's a way you
that's
can
nice.
move on. But he's choosing
Hmm.
to interpret it as a way to keep holding on,
Maybe,
instead of
yeah.
letting her go.
It's up to you how you want to interpret it. That's nice. I mean, I like it being her in some way, acknowledging that she's there and that it's like when as soon as she's gone and then she's even through the year when he's struggling through the middle of summer, you've got that scene where it's like in the montage where it happens again. He like fixes his igloo and he like fixes that part of the wall that was leaking light. But I just like this idea of her trying to tell him that she's there, but he's just not listening. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she. But the thing is like she's there and she's communicating with him, and like they have this. What's the word I'm looking? This otherworldly relationship, they're communicating
Hmm.
through the stars because she dances through the stars and she is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
stars and she's moving through the stars and everything.
yeah. Hmm.
And they have this relationship, like the scene where he's laying next to the fishing hole and you see
Yeah,
her
yeah,
reflection there, which I thought it was so beautiful, where like the
yeah. Thank
camera
you.
moves and pans around and you see her
Hmm.
reflection in that. And I thought it was so beautiful. And but the thing that kind of made me cry, what made me cry at the end was when he pulls in the blocking the entrance
Yeah,
to the igloo. And I just kind of read that as him enshrining himself. He's
yeah,
entombing himself
yeah,
into this igloo. He's choosing to not move on. He's choosing
yeah,
not to embrace the light. He's choosing to remain in perpetual darkness
yeah.
so he can see her in the stars. And I'm like, the thing about but existing outside the igloo and just like experiencing life outside the igloo is that he got to see her through the actual stars.
Yeah.
But now he's choosing to see her through this manufactured
Yeah, yeah.
starscape. And that
Well,
to me was so profoundly sad because I was like,
yeah,
oh,
it's
good
very sad.
2 years
But
off.
it's sold as like, and it's told in the film as this big celebration, this big climax, this big happy ending moment. As far as like how I treat it, the music
Yeah.
swells and he's happy, he's smiling. She looks back at him. It's like this amazing big climactic moment at the end. But it's only when you actually sort of think back on the actual act and what he's done that you realize it's not healthy. It's not like a good solution to his problem. Um, but I like that. I like that it's not. I don't know. I think that's a nice gray area, but that maybe a lot of people can relate to in terms of trying to move on from someone they've lost or trying to that it's not always going to be perfect and you don't, but you might not want to move on from them. And that I'm not saying that's the healthy thing to do, but it's just the reality of what probably a lot of people would go through. And anyway, I just thought that I like that conversation. I think it's very interesting to um yeah, I suppose reflect on the healthiness of his idea of the ending of like it. Yeah, once the dust settles and you think about it for a while, again, at first when you watch it, you'll think it's a very happy ending and that's so
Yeah.
sweet. But then when you think about it, you're like, that's not it's not the healthy thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, and I saw the happiness in it, like when he sees her,
Mm.
she taps him on his shoulder and he sees her. But then you remember, wait, this isn't actually happening, like the
Yeah,
stars
yeah,
aren't actually communicating with him, like she's not actually there.
yeah.
And and that's the thing about grief, and I think and even depression, like depression, we can function in depression. But there's a moment when you're in a depressive episode where you just stop functioning, everything feels like
Hmm.
shrinking, and like it is kind of like that, like the world closes in on you and you kind of disappear in this space. And I kind of
Hmm.
saw that this igloo stops being a home and it kind of becomes
Hmm.
a coffin for him. It becomes
Yeah,
a tomb.
yeah,
and
yeah.
and for a lot of people, like their homes, their spaces, their bedrooms and everything can become that. Like this has become
Hmm.
and like people who are like agoraphobic, for instance,
Yeah,
where like they want to get out but they don't know
yeah,
how to take that first step out. And I thought it was interesting that for him, he chooses to step in.
yeah.
He chooses the opposite. And like you said, like the film is kind of like doing like the opposite with regards
Hmm.
like the weather and everything. And
Yep.
that's kind of the same thing where
I think it'd be a really interesting thing to explore about it, a Solstice too, is to like what's that life now? That he's in this igloo where he's seeing the stars and he's seeing his partner and stuff, but like that can only go on for so long. What is the next step in his journey and his like his grieving process, like when he's trying to move on and actually let her go and try and move on from her and move like go onto the mainland and get off this ice sheet and but it's interesting to be like we end the film with this climactic triumphant moment that isn't. I mean, if you think about it from a sort of the metaphor point of view, it's not a healthy solution. But there's still some joy in it. There's still some like it's still beautiful in a way to be like to not let someone go, to like stay with them even though they're gone. And I like that element too. I like the not letting someone go and not but yeah, your point about the tomb is very intentional to be this big block that gets like sealed in. Um it's not like he doesn't build it brick by brick. It's a very
Yeah.
like, thematically it's a tomb. Um but yeah, I think it's very interesting as well to sell it to the viewer as celebration, as like almost trick the viewer when in the moment you get swept up in it and you think this is amazing. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
which is
because
funny.
because you just feel so happy because he's just been so sad, and you
Yeah,
don't want him to go back into that period of sadness again. So
yeah,
you do want him to be happy. You do want him to
yeah.
kind of see her, and again, that's like kudos to you as just a writer, and like just getting that
Mm,
emotional tone and those like, taking us on that emotional ride,
yeah,
of like joy and sadness, despondency,
yeah, yeah.
despair, isolation, and joy again, and then it's just like and then but it's
Mhm.
again like it's again forcing not forcing, it's encouraging the audience to really think about what doing something like this means.
Yeah,
Like what
yeah.
does something like this actually do to someone psychologically and emotionally?
Hmm.
Like, is he better off or is he not? Because
Hmm.
then you would think because I was thinking in my head, like you could wouldn't want him to do to shut himself away like
Yeah,
this, She
yeah.
wouldn't want him to stay
Which
isolated,
might be the conversation in Solstice too. That might be the conversation that's had to be like, this
right?
isn't good. Like,
Because I think that like the thing with like in thinking about alienated again, like in alienated, like this alien, he's on this planet, he's on this meteor, he's on this rock, and he is the only person on this rock.
mhm,
But he has the means to seek civilization other way. He has the means to seek communication, and so does
mhm.
Tulak. He has his sled. He can walk.
Yeah,
There's a tree
yeah,
line, which means that
yeah.
civilization
There's
probably is on
something
the
there.
other
Yeah,
side of that tree line.
yeah.
But he doesn't do it. He's choosing to stay apart. And it's like, would she want you to stay isolated
I
this way?
know.
She wouldn't
Yeah,
want you to like wither away like
yep.
this and that. So like that's a question I think a film like this kind of would make the audience think of. Because for me, when I watch films like this, I always think of like what I myself would do if I'm in this
Right.
situation. I also kind of is a very realistic way because
Hmm.
that's like you're dealing with very human emotions
Yeah.
and human experiences.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to hear, because I never know. Some audience will watch this and just take it all at face value and enjoy the film and think this is a really fun, happy ending. But I really enjoy hearing the sort of people who understood the sort of the other thing going on in the film, the other like metaphors and um the symbology of with things like the tomb and things like um her trying to communicate with him through the year, and it's great to hear. So it's really interesting to hear your take on it and how you've perceived it and how you've interpreted it. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, because it filled me with a lot of emotions. And something else, and something else that it made me think of. I'm not sure if you may have come across it in your research, but like there's a few cultures, ancient cultures, where wives would have been shut away in tombs with their husbands. It was
Mm,
very popular in ancient Chinese cultures and in
mhm.
some other indigenous cultures where, especially if they were like imperial cultures,
Right.
where the wives would be, I think it was also in the Egyptian culture too, where they would bury like the wives and servants. They
Mm,
would bury servants with pharaohs in the tombs, and I wanted to
yep.
ask you about that because I kind of saw this as a
Mm.
version of that where he's shutting himself away with a partner, and like
That's
he's like,
interesting. I actually never considered it in the sense of it being a sort of any kind of death or any kind of finality to it. I didn't see it like that. I saw it as like, so I'd never researched any kind of, this culture of, I think it's Egyptian to be entombed with your partner or your loved one or vice versa. And but no, that was never at least my intention in terms of it feeling like a death. It was never in my head a death. It was more just like if anything, an unhealthy decision in terms of what we would traditionally call as like healing from grief.
mm,
Um, But I mean, I mean, it's interesting to hear. It's a very interesting like take on it going a bit and like a step further to be like it is almost like a death if you're um you're not going to move on. Then this is sort of an ending, and yeah, then you are sort of entombing yourself in a way. Yeah, that's
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah, my brain always goes like kind of a bit further. I was like, this reminds me of how the Chinese emperors would bury their
Oh
concubines with them.
yeah, interesting.
Um, but we're to end on a much more upbeat note. When you said like this is going to be a trilogy, what is it about? When did you have the idea to make it a trilogy? Did you always it from like from Alienated? Did you always intend
Honestly,
to make it a trilogy?
it could be 10 films. It's just I've got a third one, and I'm saying yeah, I've got a third one that it doesn't quite. It's very different. I would say Alienated and Solstice are almost like companion pieces, and then this third one is similar in a lot of ways, but not as similar as these two are to each other. These two are twins, but this one is a cousin. That's kind of how I think of it, and I just like. Um, Yeah, it wasn't this third one wasn't always going to be part of this series, and then I had a thought about the story that a few things changed. I thought, oh, now this fits really nicely into this anthology, and it might end up being 4 or 5 films. I think I've got so many films that seem to fit into these themes. I love like the cosmos and space and stars. I love these themes of like isolation and loneliness and loss and the like power of that in all these different settings. So I could see I've got lots more of these ideas. The reason I said trilogy is because I in my head, I was like, I just make one more. They only take a long time, so I was like, I just make one more and I'm done for a while. But
If you
yeah,
do 10 films and it takes like about 4 years
I know
just to
that's
make
when I
you
need to get a
making films
team
for the rest of
helping.
your life.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but there are like different, so many different environments where you can where this things like isolation and the stars actually align. Like
Yeah, lots.
if like in the ocean, it could be someone stranded on boat on the ocean. You know, if you have
hmm
someone in a forest, yeah, they could live in a cabin
Yep.
by themselves in a forest, and all they have is the nature around them and the stars above. And like,
hmm
there's so many different ways to talk about this, and I think it's beautiful because like the human experience is limitless, and like the way we
hmm
relate to the world is so vast and different,
hmm
and that's what I love about filmmaking. Like it allows filmmakers to use their imagination and these
Yeah.
tools like animation to just like say this is how humans interact with the world. I'm going to put this into an animation and we'll
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
how this can work in this environment. And so my last question for you, I want to ask you about that, about about just like taking the thoughts you have in your head and just like translating it um
hmm
through animation and using animation as a communicative tool, right? At the beginning we
hmm
talked about how the films don't have any dialogue, so you're
hmm
relying on like the on information on the screen, like, but for you as the filmmaker, as the writer, and as this creator, like what is that process like for you, just like taking the ideas you have in your head and starting it out and putting it on screen and figuring out like using the
hmm
animation tools and all these different things to get this
Yeah,
translation
the
tool to
first
work.
thing I do is I do need to get it out of my head. You always think you've got something while it's in your head. You think you've got this perfect movie that is you can see the whole thing and you can just make it now. And as soon as you start to try and put it down on paper or on screen, you realize how many little gaps there are and like how do you get from this shot to that shot? How do I tell this? Actually, maybe this isn't as clear as I thought it was. Maybe this isn't quite working in the edit. The first thing I always have to do is just get it out of my head and get it on in some form, get it on to paper. So whether that's storyboard, so I'll just do scribbles, like look like stick figures. You can do every just to get it every shot in your out your head and onto page. In fact, this I've got here is a great like tool for so
Ooh.
this is just like a nice storyboard notebook, which is what I'll
Oh,
this is Redivider, sneak peek at Redivider, my next film. So I'll
ooh.
just like go through as much as I can and just get it out of my head onto paper. And even before that, sometimes I'll just sit on my laptop and go in like a Google Doc and I'll just write out bullet points, write every what happens in each shot. Just like it's so quick, I can just be on a laptop and it's quite therapeutic to just get this out of my head because I think when it lives in my head, it keeps me up at night. I'm thinking about it all the time and I'm like, oh wait, what? And it's like I can't switch off. So there's the first step is just getting it out there, and then then it's just a very technical process of going through it and figuring out what assets do I need to build and model in 3D and what do I need to animate and how can I. That's a very long process after that. But yeah, I think it's number one is try and get it out of your head and shape it into until you've got something good. And that's step one of many, but
Many, many, many. And but
many, many steps.
that's the thing that fascinates me with filmmaking, right? Like I'm a very visual thinker, I'm a very abstract thinker. And so I'm just fascinated with the idea of because having ideas in your head and writing it out, writing a story, writing a
Hmm.
novel
Hmm.
is different than translating what you are visually envisioning in
Hmm.
your head and translating it visually again.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why I do what I do, honestly, because I'm just so fascinated by the whole process of
Hmm.
and like what we as human beings are capable of and using
Yeah.
the tools and using like the tools like 3D and 2D animation and all these ways to get they I like just our thoughts on it, like giving us a film like again like Solstice or Alienated or some of the other projects that you work on
Hmm.
and that's why also I love animation, honestly, because sometimes what you can do with animation you can't do with the live action.
Yeah. Exactly.
And like the live action you get a different feeling from a live action that
Yeah.
you might not get with an animation. And
Yep.
again, kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, like for our generation animation was such a big part of our lives. Like so much of our
Yeah.
TV watching was animated films and TV
Definitely.
shows. Like one of my favorite shows from back in the day is Reboot, right?
Mm.
This animated show about the internal workings of a computer of the RAM process of a hard drive,
Yeah.
right? And like that was like I think I
You
just aged
can, yeah, I
myself
mean
there.
yeah, you could make that live action, but there are some things that just you naturally think of them as animated and it naturally fits animated. My next film actually probably could be live action, but because it's a bit more realistic, the people are more realistic, they're not going to be cartoony like my last two. But I just enjoy the process of animation of that kind of filmmaking and the freedom and the I don't have to like logistically go and organize a whole crew of camera people and gaffers and grips and the lighting has to be right in the day. I have full control in my own. That's what I like about it. It's the control that it gives you, and I don't need to. I can go at my own pace because it's just me, and I can whenever I'm ready, I can progress the film a little bit, or I can leave it for a few months and not have to worry if I'm affecting someone else's schedule or yeah.
Ooh, you just reminded me of something else that I did want to ask. So this will be the last question, I promise. So the other thing that I found really interesting about this film is you mentioned like the cartoony aspect of the film, like for instance, like Tulak and
Yeah.
Yuka, like the way how they're animated is cartoony, but there's some realistic aspects, like for instance,
Hmm.
the texture of the nails and the texture of
Hmm.
the wood and the stone, like those look real.
Hmm. Hmm.
They have like that kind of photorealistic aspect to
Yeah.
them. Talk about like making the choices again between what you wanted to look cartoony versus what you wanted to
Yeah.
look like as real as possible.
I think I really like. Again, I think this goes back to Pixar and how they adapted to their style, and that they find that balance very well, especially in something like the Toy Story franchise, Toy Story 4. It's almost this photorealistic world, but they've got these very cartoony, playful character designs in a very photorealistic environment. I think I've always found that to be the sweet spot of appeal in that it does feel grounded, it does feel real, and it does feel like believable, and um it helps you believe the story maybe or believe the world, but it takes the edge off slightly by having the characters being somewhat playful and somewhat like it's quite heavy themes and quite heavy ideas. And I think having the characters be a bit more like appealing and charming and cartoony is to me the really a really nice balance to strike because it's funny I won at the Rhode Island Film Festival for the grand prize for best children's animation.
Hmm.
And I think it's funny that it can be considered a children's animation and it is, it's not no reason it's not for kids. There's no like graphic content
Yeah.
or the violence or anything like that or blood or any bad language. So like by all means it's acceptable for kids. But if these two characters had been realistic looking, like photoreal Inuit characters, I don't think you would think it was for kids, even if it was the exact same, but otherwise they were realistic people. I think you would probably think it was like an adult. animation, or not necessarily adult animation, but you wouldn't sit your kids down to watch this animated thing as much. But I don't know. I think that to me is why I like it, because you get this broader appeal to be like, kids will be a bit more accessible to the kids because they will watch it for the funny, silly characters, but at the same time will be absorbed into these deeper ideas and like messages. And like, I mean, that's what Disney has been doing, or Pixar have been doing for since '95. Like just having access, like adults, they've famously become this like studio that adults love and kids love. Like, and they were the sort of pioneers of some of that technology. I think that's part of the secret is it's visually very interesting to look at photorealistic CGI, but characters and people, I think we don't like seeing photorealistic character. Like when you try and do a photorealistic human CGI, you get the uncanny valley, you get this strange. So I think I like that sweet spot of kind of everything's real except the characters, and that they're a bit more playful and light and fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can see why it would, and it does work for both the children's and adult, and that's the thing with animation. There are so many
Mhm.
people who look down in animation and see
Exactly. Yeah.
and as a children's medium. But first of all, children
Yeah.
are extremely intelligent. I learned
Yeah.
so much from watching
I
cartoons
know.
as a kid. Like as I said, I
Yeah.
mentioned Reboot. Like I learned about how
Literally how
ram and
life works,
wrong
right? Yeah,
watching
exactly.
Reboot.
Yeah.
Right? And but these are films, like a film like this, you can sit down and talk to a child about grief, about
Yeah.
with it, you know, like
Yeah.
if a child has lost a parent, the other parent can sit down and say,
Mhm.
watch this film and tell me
Sure.
what you think about it, and then discuss what grief is like,
Yeah.
you know, what loss is
Yeah.
like, you know. And so like films like this, like they are for everyone, you know. Or
Yeah.
animation is a film medium, it works for everyone, you know. And but I
Hmm.
get what you mean about like if the characters were more photorealistic, because if anything they would fit kind of, there's this, I'm not sure if there's a name for it, but like that genre of like video games, you know, like the
Hmm. Yeah.
Metal Gear Solid and those kind of video
Sure.
games where there's like this kind of photorealistic, where the humans are the ones that look more real than their surroundings,
Yeah.
and it kind of like
Yeah.
trips you out. And
That's
like,
true.
yeah, and so like I get what you mean. And it makes sense where things like the wood and the metal and the
Hmm.
stones and the natural elements are what look real. Not I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's what does look real. You know, the
It's
actual.
everything but the characters. The characters are the part that where it's a bit more playful and light, and all the emotion is told through them. So it takes the edge off a little bit of it being this devastating, like heart-wrenching. You seeing like real tears coming. Like it's none of that. It's like, it takes the edge off and it makes it a bit more accessible and um yeah, a bit more light against the sort of darkness of themes, I think.
No, and it works, and that's one of the things I like it, because even like thinking about the day's solstice, it deals with like the environment, but it also deals with the word
Hmm.
solitude. Like
I
solitude
know,
can come out as solstice.
almost when I was playing with what this film was going to be called, it was either going to be called Solace,
Mm-hmm.
Solitude, or Solstice. I don't know why I had all. It's funny because all three, Solstice has the word sol for sun and ice at the end. So
Mm-hmm.
you have these two, summer, winter. And then Solace is the same, even though it's spelled A-C-E, not I-C-E. But I was going to call it Solace spelled wrong,
Oh, okay.
Solice. Because then you've got you've got like sun and ice, like solace, and it kind of means loneliness, which I thought was nice as well. But I really like sort of priming the audience with this idea of the solstice, about it being about the shifting day-night cycle, and like they would come to the film knowing, yes, it's going to be about isolation, but like coming to the film knowing that it's going to be about that somehow, about the darkness and the light and that pattern. Yeah,
Yeah, it's about
but
this
yeah,
man waiting for the shortest, for
yeah,
the
waiting for
darkness rather
the
than waiting for the
yeah,
light, you know, which is what people wouldn't be expecting, you know. They'd be
yeah,
like
right,
thinking
right.
like he's looking for the sun, and he's
When's
like,
the
nah, I'm
summer?
looking
Like
for the night.
we are right now, waiting for the summer.
Oh my gosh. Like I'm hoping this
January.
winter is not too long, Oive. And the
Yeah,
funny
we're
thing
almost done.
is, right, and the funny thing is, like here in Toronto, like for us, there was something, the way we can tell that the day is gonna be the coldest is the brighter the sun is.
Oh, really? Then you know it's a cold
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, if the sun is shining super brightly and if the sky is all nice and blue and pretty, you'll be like, it's frigidly
Freezing.
cold outside.
Yeah. You got like a blanket of clouds, keep you warm. Yeah.
And the snow, yeah, it's actually when it's snowing, it's technically warmer because the snow acts like insulation, so
Oh,
it
that's
kind of
interesting.
traps the heat a little bit. So
Mm.
like it's a bit warmer when it's actually
Oh,
snowing than when
well,
it's not. So
that's
but
cool.
thank you so much for talking with me, Luke, about
Oh,
this
of course.
film. And I'm so curious about the next film. I know it might probably take me another 4 years, but it will be totally
No,
worth
I
it.
think this. I think that I can say the next one will be within a year. That's my
Oh,
goal. But I think it'll be. I even said this summer, but we'll see. I'm quite far into it. I've been
oh,
working on it
okay,
for a
okay.
while. I'm not just starting, so I've almost finished a first pass of animation, so I'm pretty far in.
Oh, okay then. Well,
But
I
we'll
looking
see.
forward.
You never know what life's going to throw at you. Then I don't work on it again for months, and then we'll see. But
Let's be optimistic.
yeah, let's be up this summer, coming this summer.
Let's be optimistic. Thank you so much for them. Congratulations on winning for the film and the other awards that you're up for. Like his is qualifying for Oscar for BAFTA,
Yeah.
right? So because
Yeah,
BAFTA is
BAFTA's the
Oscar.
big one I'm waiting on next. So next Tuesday, I find out I'm the final six. So long list for BAFTA is the final six short animator for Best British Animated Film. And yeah, on Tuesday, I find out of those six, did I make the three films that get nominated for the BAFTA? So we'll see. Uh, I don't. I mean, the films that are in that category, the other five are incredible shorts. So I'm aware of my odds, but I'll remain hopeful.
Well, you know, that, as you say, keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive.
Thank you, Luke, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Karen. It was lovely to chat with you, and thank you for all your thoughtful questions.
You too.